This happened about 6 months ago, and honestly, I'm still trying to make sense of it. My name is Tyler, and I'm a 22-year-old computer science major at the University of Washington. I was in my junior year at the time, taking this brutal algorithms course that was basically designed to weed people out of the program. The professor was notorious for impossible exams, and the class had this reputation for destroying GPAs. So, naturally, a bunch of us formed a study group pretty early in the semester. There were 5 of us total. Me, my roommate Chris, this girl named Emma, who sat in the front row and actually understood the material, a guy named Daniel who was quieter but really smart, and this other guy named Jason who kind of invited himself into the group after overhearing us talk about it one day. Jason was interesting, not in a good way or a bad way, just interesting. He was a transfer student from some school in California. Always wore the same black hoodie. Had this habit of staring at people a little too long when they were talking. But he seemed harmless enough, and he was actually pretty good at the coursework, so we didn't mind having him around. We'd been meeting twice a week at the library for about a month, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays after our last classes. The routine was pretty standard. We'd grab a study room on the 3rd floor, order pizza, and spend 3 or 4 hours working through problem sets and quizzing each other. It was honestly the only reason I was passing that class. This particular week we had our midterm coming up on Friday. It was going to cover everything from the first half of the semester, and none of us felt remotely prepared. We decided to do an extra study session on Wednesday night to give ourselves more time. Emma suggested we meet at her apartment instead of the library since it would be quieter and we could spread out more. She lived off campus in this older building about 10 minutes from school. Nothing fancy, just a typical college apartment. Small kitchen, living room with a couch and a TV, 2 bedrooms down a short hallway. We all showed up around 7. Emma had ordered Chinese food for everyone, which was cool of her. We set up in the living room, spreading our textbooks and notes across the coffee table and floor. For the first couple hours, everything was normal. We worked through practice problems, argued about solutions, and stressed about how badly we were going to fail. Chris kept making jokes to lighten the mood, which helped. Daniel barely said anything, but that was typical for him. Jason was being his usual self. Quiet, focused, occasionally making really insightful comments that showed he actually understood the material better than the rest of us. Around 9:30, Emma got up to use the bathroom. While she was gone, Jason asked if anyone wanted to take a break and watch something on TV. Chris said sure, and Jason grabbed the remote off the coffee table. He started flipping through channels, not really stopping on anything, just clicking through over and over. I wasn't really paying attention at first. I was still trying to figure out this one problem we'd been stuck on. But after a minute or so, I noticed that Chris was staring at Jason with this weird expression on his face. I asked Chris what was up, and he said, and I remember this exactly, "Did you see that?" I had no idea what he was talking about. Jason kept flipping channels like nothing happened. Chris leaned over to me and whispered that Jason had stopped on the security camera feed for the building. I looked at the TV, but Jason had already moved past it. I asked Chris if he was sure, and he nodded. He said it was only on screen for like 2 seconds, but he definitely saw it. It showed the hallway outside Emma's apartment door. I felt this uncomfortable knot form in my stomach. I looked at Jason, who was still clicking through channels with this completely blank expression. Daniel asked what we were whispering about, and Chris told him. Daniel's face changed immediately. He got this serious look and asked Jason to go back to that channel. Jason acted confused, asking what channel Chris was talking about. Chris said the security feed, and Jason just stared at him for a second before saying he must have imagined it. There was no security feed channel. It was probably just some show that looked like security footage. That's when Emma came back from the bathroom. She immediately picked up on the tension in the room and asked what was going on. Chris explained what he'd seen, and Emma looked genuinely confused. She said the building didn't have interior security cameras. There were cameras at the entrances, but nothing on the residential floors, and definitely nothing that would be broadcast on a TV channel. Jason shrugged and said that's what he'd been trying to tell us. Chris must have seen something else. But Chris wasn't backing down. He insisted he knew what he saw. It was a camera feed showing the hallway right outside Emma's door. There was even a timestamp in the corner. Emma grabbed the remote from Jason and started going through the channels herself, slowly this time. We all watched as she clicked through every single channel. News, sports, movies, home shopping networks, nothing that looked like security footage. When she got to the end of the channel list, she looked at Chris and said, "See?" Nothing. Chris looked frustrated. He said he wasn't making it up, that he saw what he saw. Jason suggested maybe Chris was just stressed about the exam, and his mind was playing tricks on him. That comment annoyed Chris, and he snapped back asking why Jason was so defensive about it. Jason raised his hands in this surrender gesture and said he wasn't being defensive, just trying to offer an explanation. The vibe in the room had shifted completely. What started as a chill study session now felt tense and awkward. Emma tried to get us back on track, suggesting we take a real break and eat some of the Chinese food that was getting cold. We all agreed, mostly just to move past the weird moment. We sat around eating in mostly silence. I kept glancing at Jason, trying to figure out if he was acting strange, or if I was just being paranoid now. He seemed fine, totally normal, eating his food, occasionally checking his phone, making small talk with Daniel about some programming assignment they both had due next week. After we finished eating, we tried to get back to studying, but none of us could really focus. Around 10:30, Daniel said he was going to head out. He had an early class the next morning and wanted to get some sleep. That gave the rest of us an excuse to call it a night. We started packing up our stuff, and that's when I noticed something. Jason's backpack was open on the floor, and I could see inside it. There was the usual stuff: laptop, notebooks, pens, but there was also something else. A small black device that looked like a wireless router or maybe a hotspot. It had a couple of blinking lights on it, and there was a cable coming out of it that disappeared into a side pocket of his bag. I didn't say anything right away. I wasn't even sure what I was looking at or why it seemed weird, but it stuck in my mind. Jason noticed me looking and quickly zipped up his bag. He smiled at me and asked if I was ready to go. I said yeah, and we all headed toward the door. Emma thanked us for coming and said she'd see us in class tomorrow. As we were leaving, I turned back to say bye one more time, and I saw her go to her window and look outside. She had this concerned expression on her face that made me pause. In the hallway, the four of us walked toward the elevator. Chris was still clearly bothered by what had happened earlier. He kept muttering about how he knew what he saw, and how weird it was that Jason was acting so dismissive about it. Jason didn't respond. He just walked slightly ahead of us with his hands in his pockets. When we got to the elevator, Daniel pressed the button and we all waited in silence. That's when I heard it. A faint beeping sound coming from Jason's backpack. It was rhythmic, like once every couple seconds. Beep, beep, beep. I glanced at Chris and I could tell he heard it too. Jason shifted his backpack on his shoulder, and the beeping stopped. The elevator arrived and we all got in. As soon as the doors closed, Jason said he was actually going to take the stairs instead. Said he wanted the exercise. Before any of us could respond, he hit the button to open the doors and stepped out into the hallway. The three of us looked at each other as the elevator doors closed. Chris immediately said, "That was weird, right?" Daniel and I both agreed. The elevator started descending, and Chris asked if we'd seen the device in Jason's bag. I said I had, and described it to Daniel. None of us knew what it was, but we all agreed something felt off. When we got to the lobby, we stepped outside and stood by the entrance for a minute, trying to decide what to do. That's when we saw Jason. He hadn't taken the stairs down. He was still on the third floor. We could see him through the glass doors that led to the stairwell. He was standing in the hallway outside Emma's apartment. Just standing there, looking at her door. He wasn't knocking or doing anything, just standing and staring. Chris pulled out his phone and said he was going to call Emma and tell her not to open her door. But before he could dial, Jason turned and looked directly at us through the glass. Even from that distance, I could see his expression. It was completely blank. No surprise that we were watching him. No embarrassment at being caught. Just nothing. He turned and walked toward the stairwell, and we lost sight of him. Chris finished dialing Emma, and she picked up immediately. He told her to lock her door and not open it for anyone. She asked why, and Chris said he'd explain later, but that Jason was acting really strange. She said, okay, and that she'd already locked it after we left. Chris told her to call campus security if Jason tried to come back, and she agreed. The three of us waited outside for a few minutes, watching the building entrance to see if Jason would come down. He never did. After about 10 minutes, we decided to leave. We walked back toward campus together, barely talking, all of us trying to process what had just happened. When we got to the dorms, Chris and I went back to our room. Daniel said goodnight and headed to his building. Once we were inside, Chris and I stayed up for another hour just talking about everything, trying to piece it together. The security feed that may or may not have been real. The device in Jason's bag, the beeping sound. Jason going back upstairs instead of leaving. We considered calling the police, but what would we even say? A guy from our study group was standing in a hallway. That's not illegal. We had no proof of anything actually wrong happening. The next morning, I texted Emma to make sure she was okay. She said she was fine, nothing had happened after we left. She also said she'd checked with her building management and they confirmed there were no security cameras on the residential floors. Whatever Chris had seen on the TV wasn't coming from the building's security system. Chris still insists to this day that he saw what he saw. I believe him. I don't think he made it up or imagined it. Jason didn't show up to class the next day, or the day after that, or any day for the rest of the semester. He just disappeared. I checked the student directory, and his name wasn't listed anymore. I asked around, and nobody seemed to know anything about him. It was like he'd never existed. Emma filed a report with campus security just to have it on record, but they said without any evidence of a crime, there wasn't much they could do. We never figured out what that device in his bag was. Daniel had a theory that it was some kind of transmitter that could hijack TV signals or create fake broadcasts. He said it was technically possible, but would require some pretty advanced knowledge. Chris thinks Jason had planted a camera somewhere in Emma's apartment earlier, and was using the device to route the feed to her TV. That would explain why he wanted us to take a break and turn the TV on. Maybe he was testing it or showing off. I don't know what to believe. All I know is that for those few hours, something was very wrong, and we all felt it. The worst part is not knowing what Jason's plan actually was. Why go through all that trouble? What was he trying to do? Was he planning to come back later? Did he have cameras set up in other places we didn't know about? Emma moved out of that apartment a month later. She said she couldn't sleep there anymore, always feeling like someone was watching her. I don't blame her. The four of us still meet up to study sometimes, but we don't really talk about that night anymore. It's like we've all silently agreed to just move on and forget about it. But I think about it more than I'd like to admit, especially late at night when I'm alone in my room. I find myself checking for cameras, looking over my shoulder, wondering if Jason ever actually left or if he's still out there somewhere, watching. This happened about 4 months ago, and I really need to tell someone about it because it's been eating at me ever since. My name is Marcus, and I'm a 25-year-old marketing coordinator living in Austin. I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand something. We all do things that seem harmless in the moment, small decisions that don't feel like a big deal at the time. But sometimes those small decisions can save your life, and you don't even realize it until later. This whole thing started on a Friday night in July. My friend Connor had been bugging me for weeks to come out with him and his girlfriend Rachel to this new bar downtown. I'd been working a lot of overtime and honestly just wanted to stay home and play video games. But Connor kept insisting, saying I needed to get out more and stop being such a hermit. He had a point. I'd basically become that person who goes to work, comes home, orders takeout, and watches Netflix until falling asleep on the couch. So, I finally agreed to go out. The bar was one of those trendy places with exposed brick walls and overpriced cocktails. You know the type. The kind of place where a beer costs $12 and they serve it in a fancy glass. But it was actually pretty fun. Connor and Rachel were in a good mood. The music wasn't too loud, and I was glad I'd decided to come out. We got there around 9 and spent the next few hours just hanging out. Drinking, talking, watching whatever sports game was on the TV above the bar. Around 11:30, Rachel said she was getting tired and wanted to head home. Connor asked if I wanted to share a ride back with them since we lived in the same general area. But here's the thing. I was having a good time for once. I didn't want the night to end yet, so I told them I was going to stay for one more drink and then head home on my own. Connor asked if I was sure, and I said yeah, I'd just get a rideshare. He said, okay, told me to text him when I got home safe, and they left. I ordered another beer and sat at the bar by myself for a while, just scrolling through my phone, enjoying the atmosphere. About 20 minutes later, this guy sat down next to me. He was probably in his early 30s, wearing a button-up shirt and jeans. Seemed normal enough. He ordered a drink and then turned to me and made some comment about the game on TV. I wasn't really paying attention to it, but I responded anyway just to be polite. We ended up talking for a bit. Nothing deep. Just surface-level stuff about sports, where we worked. How expensive everything in Austin had gotten. His name was Derek. He said he worked in real estate and had just closed a big deal that day, which was why he was out celebrating. He seemed friendly, maybe a little too friendly, but I figured he was just drunk and chatty. After about 10 minutes of conversation, he asked if I wanted to do a shot with him. I wasn't really in the mood, but he was insistent, said it would be rude to celebrate alone. So I agreed to one shot. The bartender poured us 2 shots of whiskey. Derek raised his glass and said something about new friendships. We clinked glasses and I downed mine. It burned, going down, which was normal. But Derek barely sipped his. He kind of grimaced and put the glass back down on the bar with most of it still in there. He said the whiskey was too strong for him and laughed it off. At the time, I didn't think much of it. People have different tolerances. We kept talking for another few minutes, and then Derek said he needed to use the bathroom. He got up and walked toward the back of the bar. I sat there finishing my beer, and that's when I started feeling weird. Not drunk weird, different. Like my head was getting foggy and my limbs felt heavy. I'd only had like 3 beers over the course of 3 hours. There was no reason I should be feeling this way. I pulled out my phone to check the time, and I had trouble focusing on the screen. The numbers looked blurry. That's when alarm bells started going off in my head. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I looked at Derek's shot glass, still sitting on the bar with most of the whiskey in it, and I remembered him insisting I take that shot. Remembered how he barely touched his own. My heart started racing. I needed to get out of there. Immediately. I stood up from the bar stool and almost fell over. My balance was completely off. I steadied myself and started walking toward the exit as fast as I could without drawing attention to myself. The room felt like it was tilting. Every step took concentration. I made it outside, and the cool night air hit my face. It helped a little, but I still felt terrible. I pulled out my phone and opened the rideshare app with shaking hands. I could barely type. It took me 3 tries to enter my home address. Finally, got a ride requested. The app said the driver was 7 minutes away. His name was Carlos. Black Honda Civic. License plate number displayed on the screen. I stood on the sidewalk, leaning against the building, trying to stay upright and alert. That's when Derek came outside. He looked around and spotted me immediately. He walked over with this concerned expression on his face and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, just waiting for my ride. He said I didn't look fine, that I looked really out of it. He offered to give me a ride home. Said his car was just around the corner and it would be no problem. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to say no, but he seemed so genuinely concerned, and I felt so terrible that part of me just wanted to sit down in a car as soon as possible. I was about to say yes. I swear I was about to say yes. But then I looked at my phone and saw that Carlos was now 3 minutes away. So instead, I told Derek that my ride was almost here and I'd be fine. He insisted, said 3 minutes was too long to wait in my condition, that I should just let him drive me. He even pointed down the street and said his car was right there, but something in the way he was being so insistent made me hold firm. I said, "No, thank you. My ride is almost here." Derek's expression changed, just for a second. The concern dropped and I saw something else underneath it. Annoyance, maybe, or anger. But then he put the concerned look back on and said, "Okay, if I was sure." He said he was going to wait with me to make sure I got in my ride safely. That made me even more uncomfortable. I told him it was fine, he didn't need to do that. He could go back inside, but he said he wouldn't feel right leaving me alone in this condition. So we both just stood there in this awful, awkward silence. Me leaning against the building, trying to keep it together. Him standing a few feet away, watching me. I kept my eyes on my phone, watching the little car icon on the map get closer and closer. 2 minutes away. 1 minute away. Finally, a black Honda Civic pulled up to the curb. I checked the license plate against what was on my phone. It matched. The driver rolled down the window and said, "Marcus?" I said yes and opened the back door. As I was getting in, Derek leaned down and asked the driver where he was taking me. The driver looked confused and said he couldn't share that information. Derek said he was just trying to make sure his friend got home safe. I cut in and told the driver to please just drive. I gave him my address again, even though it was already in the app. The driver could tell something was off. He asked if I was okay. I said I would be, I just needed to get home. He looked at Derek, who was still standing on the sidewalk watching us, and then pulled away from the curb. As we drove off, I turned around and looked through the back window. Derek was still standing there on the sidewalk, just standing there, watching the car drive away, not going back inside the bar, not walking to his own car, just standing and watching. The driver, Carlos, asked me again if I was all right. I told him I thought someone had put something in my drink. His eyes went wide and he asked if I needed to go to the hospital. I said I didn't know. I just wanted to go home. He said, okay, but he was going to call someone for me. He asked if I had a friend or family member he could call. I gave him Connor's number and he called it on his car's Bluetooth. Connor answered and Carlos explained the situation. Connor immediately said he'd meet me at my apartment. He lived like 10 minutes away. Carlos told Connor he was going to stay with me until he arrived, and Connor thanked him. The whole drive, Carlos kept checking on me through the rearview mirror, asking if I was still awake, if I felt okay. I tried to stay conscious and alert, but it was getting harder. We got to my apartment and Carlos helped me out of the car. He walked me up to my door and waited with me on the porch. He said he wasn't leaving until my friend got there. I told him he didn't have to do that he was losing money by not taking other rides. He said he didn't care. This was more important. Connor showed up about 8 minutes later with Rachel. They were both in their pajamas. Connor looked furious. He asked me what happened and I explained everything. About Derek, about the shot, about how Derek had tried to get me to leave with him. Rachel immediately said we needed to call the police and go to the hospital to get a toxicology test done. Connor agreed. We thanked Carlos and he left. Connor and Rachel drove me to the emergency room. By the time we got there, I was barely coherent. The hospital staff took me back immediately. They did a bunch of tests, including a blood draw. I don't remember a lot of the details because I kept fading in and out. The doctor told me later that I tested positive for a substance commonly used in drink spiking. I won't say which one, but it's one of those things you hear about on the news. The kind of thing you never think will actually happen to you. The doctor said I was lucky. Lucky that I'd recognized something was wrong. Lucky that I'd refused to get in a car with Derek. Lucky that I'd had a trustworthy rideshare driver. Connor called the police from the hospital and filed a report. They took my statement and said they'd look into it. They went to the bar and pulled security footage. The footage showed Derek at the bar with me, showed him ordering drinks, but the angle wasn't good enough to clearly show him doing anything to my drink. The police said, without clear evidence, there wasn't much they could do. They checked the name Derek against their database but didn't find anyone matching his description with a record in the area. The bartender from that night was interviewed and said he remembered Derek. Said Derek had paid cash for his drinks and left shortly after I did. Didn't leave any credit card trail. No way to track him down. The police said this was common with these kinds of cases. People who do this know how to avoid leaving evidence. They use fake names, pay cash, and disappear. I was in the hospital for about 6 hours. By the time they discharged me, the effects had mostly worn off, but I felt awful, physically sick and mentally shaken. Connor and Rachel took me back to my apartment and stayed with me for the rest of the night. Connor said he wasn't leaving me alone, and honestly, I was grateful. For weeks after that, I kept thinking about all the small decisions I'd made that night. If I'd said yes to getting in Derek's car, what would have happened to me? Where would he have taken me? What was his plan? And here's the thing that really messes with me. How many other people did he do this to? How many people said yes when he offered them a ride? How many people didn't have a Carlos who stayed with them? How many people didn't have a Connor who dropped everything to help? I also think about that moment when I almost said yes. I was so close to getting in his car. The only reason I didn't was because I happened to check my phone at the exact right moment and saw my ride was 3 minutes away. 3 minutes. That's all that separated me from making a decision I might not have survived. I reported what happened to the bar management. They said they'd keep an eye out for anyone matching Derek's description, but I doubt he ever went back there. Why would he? There are dozens of bars in Austin, hundreds of potential targets. He could just move to a different location every time. I don't go out to bars alone anymore. Actually, I barely go out at all. Connor thinks I'm being paranoid, but I don't care. I learned something that night that I want everyone watching this to understand. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If someone is being too friendly, too insistent, too concerned, ask yourself why, and never, ever get in a car with someone you don't know. I don't care how nice they seem. I don't care how much sense they're making. Just don't do it. Also, if you're going out, go with friends. Watch each other's drinks. Make sure everyone gets home safe. And if someone offers to buy you a shot out of nowhere, maybe think twice. I'm not saying everyone who offers to buy you a drink has bad intentions. Most people are good, but the ones who aren't are really good at seeming like they are. I still think about Derek sometimes. Wonder if he's still out there doing this to other people. Wonder if anyone else was as lucky as I was to get away. I hope so. I really hope so. But I also know that statistically not everyone does. And that keeps me up at night. So yeah, that's my story. That's what happened to me on what should have been just a normal Friday night out with friends. I'm telling you this because I want you to be careful. I want you to watch out for yourself and for your friends, because it can happen to anyone. It almost happened to me, and I never thought it would. Stay safe out there.